Let us be going. I'm on the wrong speaker. Can I fix that? Probably should have done this before now.
Harry.
But we don't have time to fix it, so that's just the way it's going to be. Everybody's going to have to speak up.
What?
All right, we are talking about, well, we made it to the Reformation, and you usually associate the Reformation with a theological revolution in a sense, and a revolution in church history was also a revolution, the beginning of a revolution politically and intellectually. I mean, the transformative nature of the 13 to the 1600s is extraordinary. I mean, that period of time covers the Renaissance, the Black Death, from a larger perspective, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the 30 Years' War, the founding of the United States in the midst of that period in the 1600s, which just really was a transformative period of time, few hundred years in the history of Western civilization. And so whether you like it or not, you've been affected by it comprehensively. Our political institutions, our religious heritage, the culture, how society is formed, its norms, its morals, all of it was shaped by that period. And so one of the most important elements from our standpoint is the handing down of the Word of God by no single person, no grand plan except for God's himself. It just quietly, like the history of redemption itself, it proceeds through the timeline invisibly sometimes and largely invisibly. But we we have benefited from it greatly. We have the Word of God in our hands, which we kind of take for granted. You know, we just have it, and we just like it, like it just dropped in our laps, right from God. And in a sense it did, but in a sense it didn't. So this little diagram here is a representation of two branches or forks in the transmission of the Bible. We have to get from the first century forward, copying the Bible, let's just stick with the New Testament, by hand, time after time after time. At first by non-professional scribes or copyists. That's the first few centuries. And then by professional scribes and copyists, that's maybe the 4th and 5th centuries, the 300s and 400s, which we talked about. That's the period of the great uncials. And then we enter back into a period of copying sort of by non-professional scribes again, because the script is going to change from the block letter thing we were looking at before.
Connected.
I got connected with the speaker. I don't know why. We're going to go from the block letter professional scribe look. You looked at that. We saw that with those great uncials, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. That beautiful column looks more like what we see today in books, but all uppercase letters. And then back to somewhere around the 8th century, the 7 or 800s, we go back to cursive. They start using a cursive approach, which we've inherited. We have printing. We have, what do we call it? What do we call non-cursive? Whatever we call it, print, whatever it is. Just so imagine, instead of moving from all capital letters all the time to now you start writing in English in script, in cursive. It can happen more quickly. It's more accessible to the lay people because they can do it. They start including spaces and so on and so forth. That's where they ended up. And then that's going to be the vast majority of manuscripts. We'll look at the stats, but there's somewhere around 5,800 manuscript fragments in Greek that still survive today. And you should get a handout on that shortly. We'll look at it anyway. But the point is, the vast majority of that is those later sort of cursive Greek manuscripts by non-professionals. And so that's actually going to be what's going to underlie the King James Version, which we'll talk about today. But that takes us into the period of Wycliffe, where you see a translation from the Latin Vulgate to English, Old English, High Middle Ages English, I think it's called, or something like that. But that just shows you the endurance and authority, supremacy of the Latin Vulgate. Jerome 405 AD, 350 years after the books were written, creates the Latin Vulgate, translates the Greek into Latin Vulgate, the newer Latin, from, away from Old Latin. And then that survives and endures for 1,000 years until Wycliffe is the first crack in the foundation with his English translation from the Latin Vulgate. And that simple, revolutionary, in a sense, subversive act, where he's subverting not just Latin, he's subverting church, the gatekeeping, church authority, because the church owned it. And if you wanted to hear the Bible or read the Bible, you did so through the mediation of the church. It's all about the mediation of the church. And there's other mediations of the church that existed at that time and do now, which were referred to as the sacraments, where you have the mediation of the grace of God through the sacraments in the church: baptism, the Eucharist, these indulgences, these sorts of things. Indulgence, the sacrament, extreme unction, marriage. But the church was the possessor, was the mediator between God and man in basically kind of every way. And part of that was the use of the employment of Latin, the Latin Bible, to enforce that. So there was earlier in the 1300s, there was an attempt to translate into French, which caused a ruckus, and the Pope at the time, I can't remember I think it's the 1300s, he came down on it because he didn't want the lay people preaching on their own. So, there wasn't that people necessarily would never try. It just was never, when you're up against the authority of the church and the consequences, then you fall in line and you do what they say, which is what was happening until Wycliffe. So Wycliffe passes off the scene in the late 1300s, and then in the 1400s, of course, we see the printing press. So what you're looking for now, then what you have is, was it 3 legs? I would think of it as. You have the print. What you have is, you need the printing press, you need a Greek text of the New Testament, and you need the people who are willing to take that Greek text and translate it into the language that you speak. And so that third one, that's what we're waiting for. We've already got the printing press. Erasmus, whom we'll talk about more today, is going to gift Western civilization and potential translators, a Greek text of the New Testament that will come to be known as the Textus Receptus, the text received, the received text, the text received by all, which it was. And now you're just waiting for the dam to break, and or better analogy, the floodgates to open. And the first person who's going to do that is William Tyndale. So let's go ahead and deal with that period. We're now solidly at the very beginning of the Reformation. So we're at the beginning of the 1500s, the 16th century. So on our bigger diagram, if you still have that, I'll go ahead and make this big for a second. If you're at home, you're not seeing the big one, but this is the diagram, the timeline I've been using. And so we are now over there, just on the other side of 1500, and you'll see that green diamond. with Erasmus, Desiderius Erasmus, I think is how you say his first name or something like that. 1516. He is going to publish a print edition, because now we have the printing press, of the Greek text of the New Testament. And he is going to have access to a handful of Greek manuscripts that are very, very late. He's over in Basel, in Switzerland, over to the west. He's not in Rome. You get something?
Yeah, the paper jam, so we don't have the second page on it.
I thought I made a white copy of that, but apparently I didn't. So he's going to make his text. He's going to be in a rush to get it printed, published, because there's a Spanish crew working on the same thing. I can't remember the first word, but it's the polyglot. So there's a race to publish. If you ask why did he hurry to get this thing out, and why did he stick with so few manuscripts, and why not spend more time preparing? The answer is because you want to publish or perish. You want to get this thing out. And so he puts out his Greek text first in 1516. The Spanish edition came out, I think, in 1520. So probably, if Erasmus hadn't done it, we would know about the Spanish one in 1520, and that's what Luther and Tyndale would have used. But now they have a Greek text of the New Testament for the first time to be used for translation, basically for the first time since, I don't know, Vulgate, since Jerome did it in 405. He had a Greek text. But after that, it's all Latin. And then there's the copying of the Greek manuscripts one after another. But now we have a new, complete edition of the New Testament in the original Greek, which is Koine Greek. Now, what's interesting about that period of time is I don't think there was any formal training on Koine Greek, the common Greek of the New Testament. They had classical Greek, Plato, those writers. So that's what you learned in universities, classical Greek. So you could read the classical writers like Plato. And so, they took that knowledge of that Greek and they applied it to these manuscripts, which is kind of like the difference would be us, and we've already looked at Tyndale's Bible and Wycliffe's Bible. So now you have to figure out, you're looking at Wycliffe's Bible and you want to translate it into modern English or modern Greek. Be like, take Wycliffe's Bible in English and translate it into modern English. Well, you've got some work to do. You saw how hard it was to read. Well, that's what they were up against, because the period of time when you could go to the university and do a 4-year degree or whatever in where you get trained in Koine Greek, that was in the future. These guys were these guys set the stage for all of that by creating the demand. So it's a classic case of, if you have a product, you got to have demand for it. In this case, it was kind of the other way around. Build the product and they will come to buy it. That's what Erasmus did. He made the product in Koine Greek, the Textus Receptus, and it's a classic case of unintended consequences or unforeseen consequences, and it just broke the dam open. And part of that was then to subvert the gatekeepers. So the Catholic Church the church in Rome did not want any part of that. And so he was already considered off the reservation. I don't know the official position of the Catholic Church on this, but he ran into a lot of trouble. He was viewed with a great deal of suspicion for his work he was a Catholic scholar, but he was viewed with great suspicion by the Catholics and by the Protestants. And that's how he ended up in that little war with Luther that caused Luther. He wrote a book called On the Freedom of the Will, that Erasmus did. He was kind of goaded into it, I think, by the Catholics. We can get into the theology of that later. But then that prompted Luther to write his masterpiece, which is On the Bondage of the Will. which is a stirring manifesto on the effects of original sin and enslavement to sin and so on and so forth, and election. So if you haven't read On the Bondage of the Will, you should do so if you like this sort of thing. Get a copy that has an introduction, a big introduction, because they'll explain. When you read that book, you're being dropped into the middle of a huge debate, a huge debate of the 16th century. So it needs some context and to understand why they were having this debate and why Luther was saying the things he was and insulting Erasmus so much in the book, as I recall. But you get a book like that has an intro. I think J.I. Packer wrote an intro to the one that I have. It's like 60 pages long, just the intro. But it's a fascinating insight into the storm of controversy that Erasmus unleashed, both with his Greek text when he came to prominence among the reformers, because they were going to use him, and then when he decided he was going to weigh into the debate on the theological difference between the Protestant reformers and sort of the Catholic orthodoxy. So anyway, that's Erasmus, Textus Receptus. I should look at my notes. Hold on a minute. You can view Erasmus if you're into time periods. Erasmus was the next step. Hiding floating meeting controls. He was kind of the next step. Thank you. Please. He was kind of the next step in the Renaissance. It really all started. I don't know why my voice is cracking, but it is. It really started with the Renaissance, and I don't know enough to talk about the Renaissance, but that was the period they give birth to. It's like the offspring. The Renaissance is going to give birth, in a sense, to the Reformation, and the Reformation is going to play a hand in giving birth to the Enlightenment. And then from our perspective, the Enlightenment's going to give birth, and that whole period is going to give birth, frankly, to the United States. And so these things are all related, and they follow on each other in terms of time period. So he recovers the New Testament in its original language. It's one of the greatest achievements in the history of the church by a Roman Catholic scholar who was rejected by the Protestants and by the Catholics. Okay, that was 1516 was his first edition. I believe that's the edition that Tyndale's going to use, and Luther. Tyndale's going to translate into English. We'll get to that story in a minute. Luther is going to translate into German. Both of them are going to do so under duress. And we'll talk about more Tyndale than Luther, but because he was German. Let's see. What's interesting about the Erasmus case is we've talked about these text types. I'm going to close this down for a second. We talked about these text types right here. Right? You have the Alexandrian text, which is the one you're reading basically in English. Then you have the majority or Byzantine text. That's the Textus Receptus, from which the King James Version is translated. And then you have the Western text, which is going to fall out. Not that there aren't probably Western readings that are included, but for our purposes, it's about the Alexandrian tradition and the Byzantine or majority tradition. Majority because there's so many more. But anyway, while he's translating over here in Basel, somewhere over here in Switzerland, I don't know, on this map, while he's doing that, what will turn out to be the most important ancient Greek text of the New Testament is sitting safe and sound in Rome, held by the church. He doesn't use it. They don't know what they have. They don't realize how old and how important that manuscript is. So he, I think, is kind of dismissive of it. And also there's the time factor. You have to travel to Rome because they ain't letting it out. You have to do all this work there on this manuscript Vaticanus from the mid 300s, which they don't know at that point. So instead, he just uses his late manuscripts from the Byzantine tradition. Well, ironically, Vaticanus is an Alexandrian text. So if he'd have just used Vaticanus, he would have had to stop at 9:14 and do something, Hebrews 9:14. But if he had decided to use Vaticanus, then the King James Version would have been translated from an Alexandrian text, and it would have sounded very much like, in fact, most of the time identical to the text that you read in English Standard Version or New American Standard and so on and so forth. It's just one of those sort of accidents of history from the human standpoint.
Even between the two different things, there's still like 85%.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Erasmus had a quote. This is so underappreciated. He had a quote. What was his motive? Was he just a scholar engaging in an academic? What animated him? What drove him not just to do it, but to ignore the consequences, because there was consequences, to proceed full speed ahead in spite of the consequences, exactly like Luther, exactly like Tyndale. All three of them paid a price.
They spread of the gospel.
Yeah, here's a quote.
Common man.
Here's a quote from Erasmus. I long for the plowboy. I don't know what our parallel would be today. I long for the plowboy to sing the scriptures to himself as he follows his plow, the weaver to hum them to the tune of his shuttle. I don't know what a shuttle is. And the traveler to beguile with them the dullness of his journey. He wanted the traveler to have a Bible in his hands so that he could spend his journey studying the scriptures. So he was expecting then somebody, I think, by implication, somebody was going to have to take his text and translate it into the native languages. God, how else is the plowboy going to have a Bible open in one hand and read it while he's plowing with the other, if such a thing is possible? But that's what animated him. So we are that heritage. We have received, if he could wake up today and look around him, he would probably be amazed. He certainly wouldn't be upset that the vast majority of Bibles today are not translated from his edition. My hunch is that if he could have gotten his hands on Vaticanus in a later edition, he absolutely would have started using that text and comparing and so on and so forth. He almost certainly didn't consider his text to be some kind of sacred authority, which is kind of the status that it obtained. But anyway, that was his quote. He wanted to make the Greek text as accessible as possible to scholars and translators. So that was his work. Okay, that takes us to Tyndale. This is the did this morning. Hopefully it works for something. So there's what we want to talk about now. Really, it's all the Erasmus legacy, but there's the Tyndale legacy. We like theologians, so we think in terms of Martin Luther and John Piper and I don't know who else, whatever the great theologians are. We tend to think that way. Does anybody here know who the translators are who translated the Greek text of the New Testament that became then the English Standard Version? Does anybody know a single name? I don't. It's a lot. It ain't one. It's a lot of them. Does anybody know the name of a translator into the King James Version? King James Bible, 1611. I don't. I don't know why I said that. We'll get back to it. So let's talk about Tyndale. So here's what happened with Tyndale. He had this sort of feud with the crown in England. They did not want an English translation of the Bible. This is 1520 something. They had no interest in that. And so he's got this feud going on. He picks up the Erasmian idea about putting the Bible in the hands of the common person So the quote is from, and how exactly accurate is it? I'm not sure. I think it is, but based on what I could read, I will cause a boy that driveth the plow. There's the reference to the plow. Let me start over again because it's Old English. I will cause a boy that driveth the plow, that he shall know more of the scriptures than thou dost. Probably meaning the scholar or the church. I don't know. So he takes it upon himself to be the third leg of the stool. You have the printing press, mass production. You have a Greek edition of the New Testament, Erasmus 1516, and it is waiting for a Tyndale. A guy with a Herculean courage and skill. I mean, this man taught, Hebrew. He did the whole thing. He's not 65. I don't know when he was born, but he died in 1534 or 6. He's a relatively young guy. I mean, the intellectual giants that these people were. I mean, it's incredible how early, how fast they work. Luther, his formal training finished by the time he was 22, 23. He's got a master. They got all this higher education. It's unbelievable, these people. But, and I suppose when you have such a high death rate, you got to get the work done.
Seems my memory of what I've read about this is that Tyndale actually went to Germany and studied Greek under Luther or his proteges.
So the statement is that Tyndale studied either with Luther or with Luther's group, and he was accused of that. And from what I could read, there's no evidence that he ever came into contact with Luther, and he denied it because that's how they were trying to subvert him. Because Luther was, Luther was he was the devil. And so any association with Luther would defame Tyndale's reputation. But you guys can look it up. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that's my understanding, that they never actually met, and that Tyndale actually distanced himself from Luther. I have no idea what they thought of each other. They didn't really operate in the same realms because Tyndale, I don't think he did theology. So, Luther was always looking for a fight.
Yeah.
But if you don't say anything about theology, it's hard for Luther to get after you. He got after Erasmus only because Erasmus decided to weigh in on something that Luther, it will turn out, is an intellectual giant on, the question of the bondage of the will. But anyway. Okay. So he takes the baton from Erasmus, and in 1526, you see how fast things are happening. Erasmus's Greek text comes out in 1516. It takes exactly that long, 10 years, for Tyndale to produce an English text from the Greek text, remembering that he's got to do the work of, no, he doesn't. Never mind. Erasmus cleared the way because now we've got a Koine Greek text. So he makes it easy just on that fact alone. So he puts out his English text in 1526, but the crown doesn't want it. So he can't do it in England. So he travels to the continent to produce his English text. And he's still getting opposition. He produces his text, and copies of it get smuggled back to England. And so they have had enough. So through intrigue, some of it may have just been for financial profit. Did I write down the guy's name? Because he deserves to live in infamy. I can't remember the name of the guy who betrayed him. He wasn't a friend. He worked his way, he's like a plant. He worked his way into the inner circle. There's the infamous story where he walks Luther out into the street, Tyndale, unbeknownst to Tyndale, to be arrested on the continent. In Basel? Where is he?
Yeah.
Is that Basel too? Henry Phillips was the guy's name. Brussels. He was working in Brussels. He got betrayed in Brussels. And that was in 1536. But I think by then he had finished his complete and most refined text of of the Bible. It just so happens it waited long enough for him to finish that text in 1536. But he was betrayed in 1535. I think I remember something of the story that he may have smuggled parts of it out from prison. I don't remember exactly, but it's all out there if you want to look it up. But anyway, he gets betrayed by this man named Henry Phillips for financial gain, maybe. I don't know, but somebody was paying for it. And 1534 was his final complete edition of the whole Bible. So while he's trying to hide from everybody, he's now doing both Hebrew and Greek into English. And we're going to actually look at one or two of his translational efforts, and it's going to look awful familiar, as the pastor indicated before. Okay, so he spends 16 months in prison, 1535 and 6, and then in 1536, they didn't mess around. He was strangled and burned in Brussels. And they would have considered the strangling to be an act of mercy so that he wouldn't be burned alive, because that's how they rolled back then. Treason, you name it. What did the crown think of this? Treason. This is not a theological debate. This is a debate about authority, rightful authority. How dare he subvert the crown? And from the church's standpoint, how dare he subvert the authority of the Pope? I don't know. But at any rate, the famous story of his last line, the last thing he said, it has the ring of truth, but also it's so perfect that you wonder. His final words are, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." So if true, then to his dying breath, what he wanted was for the king to take the next step, hand the baton off, Erasmus, Tyndale, the crown, and the crown now sanctions an English Bible. That's what he wanted. Boy, did he get it.
Yeah.
1537, the Matthew Bible. Thomas Matthew was his pen name. Yeah, Thomas Matthew was his pen name. The real name was John Rogers. Authorized by, of all people, Henry VIII. He's the one with the wives, right?
Yeah,
7 wives,
he started.
it's such an interesting time. He authorizes an English Bible within a year of Tyndale's death. He just wasn't there to see it. It's kind of got this ring of, it reminds me of Stephen in Acts 7 and 8. He gets stoned. He kind of hands the baton. Paul's there. It is going to end up being the case. That's just what I think. One Hellenistic Jew, Stephen, hands the baton off to another Hellenistic Jew, Paul, whose life will parallel Stephen in so many ways. It's just Stephen never got to see the result. And I firmly believe that very nearly, my hunch is Paul had a sense of that, because he's going to bring up Stephen when he's standing before the council in Jerusalem at the end of the book. He's going to bring up Stephen's name. So Stephen, it seems to me, was on his mind. Anyway, you have that kind of similar thing with I guess the analogy breaks down a lot when it comes to Henry VIII. But hey, when you're in the hands of God, you do what he says, even if you don't know what you're doing. And so Tyndale doesn't live to see it. You now have the importance of the Matthew Bible. It's not that everybody that lived into the future and everybody used it. It's that was the moment when the crown sort of get conceded. I don't know what you want to call it, but they now sanctioned the mass production of an English Bible.
It seems like something that always flows from martyrdom. Just like you said with Stephen being martyred, it set off spread of the gospel, getting away from Jerusalem, but going everywhere else.
Yep.
men like, Jan Hus being martyred, it set the stone for Luther, you know? And
Yeah.
And then Tyndale set the stone for the English Reformation.
Attempting to stamp out a revolution or what do you want to call it? An opposition movement by killing everybody off. That almost never works. You know a lot of opposition movements and people. The reason you do is because their movement lived on. So 500 years later, we're still talking about the Lollards and the Swiss reformers, and well, they didn't really get persecuted. But anyway, that's how it works, man. You try to stamp these people out, and it almost never goes the way it's expected. Okay. The New Testament, it's not just that the Matthew Bible was sanctioned and mass produced. The New Testament was Tyndale's New Testament. So not only did God open the King of England's eyes, he did it by ordaining, in my view, that the King of England would print Tyndale's New Testament. Okay. So we continue to move down. I forgot about this timeline. We continue to move down this timeline. And there's a couple more, which I don't have a lot to say about because I don't know much about them. But I just wanted to give you can see how fast it happens after Erasmus. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have seven translations, 7 editions of the New Testament into English within 90 years or 100 years after Erasmus produces a Greek New Testament. And then it will stop. You'll notice it stops with the King James. And that King James version, they wouldn't have called it a version. The King James Bible, we'll look at the title of it in a minute. The King James Bible then will reign supreme until the late 1800s. And we'll get back to that. Then you have the Bishop's Bible, 1568, which is going to become the official Bible of the Church of England. So we now see in England, in the English Reformation, there's going to be 3 Reformations that are independent. It's not like one sparked the other, all because of the situation, the events on the ground. Once the printing press is there, once the Greek text of the New Testament is there, man, it's off to the races, and they just go. So you're going to have an English Reformation. Tyndale's probably the most famous name for that. You're going to have a German Reformation, Martin Luther, and then you're going to have a Swiss Reformation, which is going to be Zwingli and Calvin, but Calvin is French. He's going to move to Switzerland so he can plant churches. So if you ask the question, what was Calvin's calling from his perspective, in spite of the fact that the man wrote a commentary on every book of the Bible, what have you done lately? Or what have I done lately? He viewed himself as a church planner of sorts. So he's going to end up in Switzerland because he's going to be guilted into it. I think it's Zwingli or somebody, if you don't come and do this, God will curse you or something. And so he says, oh, I don't want to be cursed by God, so I'm going to go do that. So off he goes, to paraphrase ignorantly John Calvin. So he ends up in Switzerland. We had to use his commentary on Hebrews in my class on Greek grammar in seminary. We had to read that commentary, and it's excellent. They never really become outdated. I mean, they're outdated, but they're not. They're such great writers. It's, you read the magisterial writing of these people, Luther especially. Go read the 95 Theses. What incited the war between him and the Roman Church? Just go read those things, and his ability to capture a thought or to put a dagger in the belly with the way that he frames things. It's unbelievable.
Going back to Erasmus, the Greek text in 1516, 1517 is when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses, and it was Erasmus's text that really got the ball rolling there.
Yeah, I don't know the relationship between those two, but the dates probably are not coincidental.
No.
1516 and 1517. And then Luther will end up standing before the king. I don't remember which one, not in England, Germany, giving an account of himself. He won't change, he won't recant. That's that, what's that famous statement of his? We don't have time to talk about it, but
Here I stand.
here I've said what I've said, here I stand. I don't remember what he says exactly, but he fully expected on his way back that he was going to be assassinated. So he was essentially co-opted on the way back. Some have used the word kidnapped, put in this castle, in which for 9 months or something, in which 9 months, I think that's the time period in which he translates Erasmus's text. He might have done the whole thing. Old Testament and New Testament. I don't remember, but
I think it's a little learn from the Old Testament. You have to learn Hebrew.
but he translates at a minimum Erasmus's text into German just by accidents of history. No long-term plan, no big plan about the thing. If they hadn't have done that, went and grabbed him and put him in this castle, would he have done that? I don't know what he would have done, but now you have a German Reformation and an English Reformation where they both put the Bible into the hands of the common person. In 1568, there is now the Bishop's Bible, which becomes the official Bible of the Church of England. And that Bishop's Bible, but again, look at the chain. Luther sits there all the way through. His text, his English text becomes the standard. Tyndale, excuse me, becomes the standard time after time, including with the Bishop's Bible. 1568.
So the Geneva Bible, that was probably the Church of Scotland's official Bible.
Yeah, I didn't really look into it.
I know that it supposedly had Calvinistic leanings.
By then, Calvin is dead. He died in 1534. I think 1534. He wasn't 50. Oh, he did? 1560? Okay.
64.
Okay. What did he do in 1534? I don't remember. There's too much stuff to remember unless I write it all down, which I didn't do.
That might be when he.
Okay. I think we just keep going. Oh, no, before we keep going. So let's take a look at something here. I went ahead and, if you don't know this site, it's a pretty good site, Bible Hub. If you think you're unaffected by Tyndale's translation, how familiar is this? There's Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. These are Tyndale's words. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Lives on today in every single translation. The earth was void and empty, and darkness was upon the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the water, upon the waters. Water. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness, and called the light day, and the darkness night. And so of the evening and morning was made the first day. William Tyndale got it right.
I get caught by the small G there on verse 2. I'm curious why that is, because he's got capital G's elsewhere.
Wasn't sure.
For God so loveth the world, yet, I don't know what that is. I don't know. He hath given his only Son, that none that believe in him should perish, but should have everlasting life.
Kind of translation into the common thing go on in the eastern part of the world.
Does the translation into the common language go on in the eastern part of the world? The eastern part of the world speaks Greek.
Already did.
That's why there's thousands of those minuscule, those cursive manuscripts over there.
So spreading the
But
over there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never really studied what was happening over there in the East. We're Western centric, which I make no apologies for. So, yeah, we're interested in how we move from Greek to Latin and then the overthrow of Latin back to Greek. Thank you, Erasmus and Wycliffe. Well, Erasmus, and then back to English. And thank you to Tyndale and Luther and some others.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this last week, I think it was Alexander, the Great, his conquering was all eastward. He didn't go westward into the rest of Europe.
Right.
Rome did. But then
So here's some translations that you might be familiar with as well. Genesis 15:6, and he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Right out of Luther. I mean, Tyndale, I keep saying Luther. John 1, in the beginning was that word was with God, and that word was God.
I like that.
He got it right, because you don't see the word or single between was and God. Was a God. There's no definite article. There's no indefinite article in Greek. There's no there's only the in Greek. That's the article. There's no in Greek. And so certain other religious groups who believe that Jesus was a created being, put between was and God. Luther, Tyndale, Greek scholar, got it right. Thank heaven. Literally. Thank God. We didn't have to fight that fight. But that would have been interesting if was a God made its way into the King James Version. Well, that would have been interesting.
I have been attempting to move my thinking and my talking to that type of language. It is difficult to talk without an indefinite article.
It is,
It's
yeah.
very difficult. Even when referring to God, it's difficult. Because the world doesn't believe in the God. They believe in a God.
Okay. King James the First commissions a thoroughly revised or a new Bible for the Church of England in 1604. I forget the name of the conference. It's going to be scholars from Westminster, Oxford, and Cambridge. So the King James Version, King James Bible, not a version, Bible, was the work of the highest scholarship in England. Westminster, Oxford, Cambridge, at least 47 scholars worked on this project over the course of 7 years. So that's what went into the King James Version, the King James Bible. The title page does not say the King James Bible. It's the Holy Bible, newly translated out of the original tongues and with the former translations diligently compared and reused. That's what it's called. And then it's appointed to be read in the churches. So it has that kind of authority. And then it will, traditionally then it will become known, because of that, that's the Bible that was appointed to be read in the churches. It will become known as the authorized version. But the very fact that you have versions now of the Bible, you got the Bishop's Bible and the Matthew, but you got all these Bibles out there. Think of the difference between that and the 1,000 years prior to that period. It's unbelievable.
I remember once I was in a church and there was a guest speaker there, and he was a KJV or only guy, and he's going off on how that King James, 7th English translation, 7th the perfect number, therefore King James must be the perfect translation.
So the King James Version is the 7th English translation and is therefore the perfect translation. That's fine, except he's not reading it right now. He's reading the 1769 version or 1789. I forget which one it is. So, Anyway, the point there about the King James is It was a magnificent achievement for its time, and it resulted directly from what Tyndale unleashed. And the subversion of the gatekeeping was such that they couldn't stop it. And by the beginning of the next century, in the West, in that part of Europe, Latin was gone. And it was Greek had resurged, and now the English translations from it. And so now the King James is going to become, ironically, the fixture in the Western tradition that virtually parallels the fixture that, it's unofficial, but the fixture that the Latin Vulgate was before. It's another one of those accidents of history that's extraordinary. And remember, this is another one of the great ironies of the King James Bible, that the great Protestant Bible was based on a Greek text produced by an Orthodox Roman Catholic scholar who had no part in the Reformation, that was willing. He didn't want any part of it, and distanced himself from the Reformation whenever he had the chance to do so. Now, while that's going on, we'll finish with this. We still have the Latin Vulgate living on through the Mass, through the church. But eventually, 1582, a translation from the Latin Vulgate, they will do what Wycliffe did. It just took exactly 200 years, almost exactly 200 years. Wycliffe finished his at 1382. I think it was 1382. 200 years later to the year, if I'm right about that, the Roman Church sanctions the Latin Vulgate to be translated into English. That will become known as the Douay-Rheims version of 1582. The Bible that I was reading when I was converted, the Old Testament I have it at home, is the Douay-Rheims. And the New Testament, this is a 1950s edition, was a New Catholic translation of the New Testament. But everybody finally concedes by the end of the 1500s. All because of, in my view, Erasmus, the printing press, William Tyndale. Because it's an English-centric view. I unapologetically am approaching this from an English vantage point.
Well, it's the English-speaking world, the majority of missionary work has gone out. And so the English Bible has had such a tremendous broad impact.
Yeah, through missionary work, the English Bible has, a high percentage of those missionaries are English speaking. But the translation work continues. You have Wycliffe Bible translators, interesting. Tyndale House, which is a subsidiary of one of those big colleges in England, Oxford or Cambridge or something like that now. I forget which one. But man, the debt of gratitude, what God did through these people. Well, we're going to talk now about, we're going to fast forward again, because I want to make sure we finish. We have 3 more weeks. But we're going to fast forward to the 1800s, where you're going to see another revolution in the production of a Bible in English. We'll start with 2 men by the name of Westcott and Hort, who, if you Google, we'll look at a couple of it, but if you Google those names, they are the devil to the King James only people. They are the devil. YouTube, wherever you will go. Well, actually, we'll do that. We'll go look. It lives on, man. And part of the reason is the Westcott and Hort version is going to be used by Eberhard Nestle, who's going to produce the first English edition of the Greek text that we use. We're now on the 28th edition. So there's an awful lot of Westcott and Hort. Just like Tyndale lives on all the way to the King James, Westcott and Hort live on all the way to our modern Greek text of the New Testament. And they are never going to forgive us. They're never going to forgive Westcott and Hort. I have no, I'm just an observer. I find it interesting, you know, to think about and talk about and draw some inferences about it, you know. But so yeah, we'll talk about Westcott and Hort and Eberhard Nestle. We'll talk again about von Tischendorf, who brought Sinaiticus back out publicly into the world. We'll talk about St. Catherine's Monastery, where it was housed. All of this happened in the mid 1800s and then the late 1800s. So we're back to a revolutionary period in terms of the editions of the Bible. That's it. Thanks for joining, Doug and Lois, if you're still out there.
Thank you, Gary.
Hi, Kay. See you, Nate, Naomi.
Thank you, Gary.
Have an awesome day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's Mike. I didn't realize. Yeah, Mike Licky.